Blind girl humiliated at wedding, but she stunned billionaire CEO at the altar. I now pronounce you. The pastor's voice faltered, and so did every breath in the room. She stood at the altar in a black coat, the veil hiding nothing, not her eyes, not her truth. You said you loved me, she whispered, but I went blind saving your life, and you let them dress me like a joke. Gasps rippled through the pews, laughter turned to ash, and from the last row a man in a dark suit rose, calm, sharp, and rich enough to rewrite her entire life. Then marry me, he said. Who are you? She asked, trembling. The only man who saw you when no one else did. And in that moment, she took off the veil. And the world saw the bride who was never meant to be forgotten. The day a bride is humiliated is the day a woman is either broken or born. There's something sacred about a wedding, even the ones you don't believe in. The smell of lilies, the hush before the music begins, the weight of satin against trembling skin. They say it's the happiest day of a woman's life, but for Susanna Quinn, it began with silence and ended with thunder. 3 years ago, Susanna lost her sight in a fire while rescuing her fiancé from a burning vehicle. Smoke blinded her eyes, heat seared her skin, but she never once hesitated, because love, she believed, was meant to cost something, and he was worth it, or so she thought. Her name hadn't always been one whispered with pity. Back then, she was vibrant, hopeful, the kind of woman who believed in stories, in second chances, in fairy tale endings, even if they came from pain. But the world didn't reward quiet women with scars. It mocked them. Especially when the man they risked everything for decided they were no longer beautiful enough to be seen. Her fiancé Derek Vaughn, heir to one of the largest corporate empires in Chicago, had once held her hand in hospital rooms and promised forever. But over time, forever faded. Her name disappeared from his lips, then from the headlines, then from the guest list. What remained was a wedding planned in her name, but not in her honor. A wedding where the bride was meant to be mocked, where her gown was replaced with something cruel, where guests came not to witness love, but to enjoy a performance. And Susanna, still pretending to be blind, not out of deception but out of survival, stepped into that grand cathedral as a woman already betrayed. She wore the veil they gave her, she carried the bouquet they arranged. But her heart, her dignity, those were hers alone. What no one expected, not Derek, not his polished, venom-laced mother, not the best friend who stood in the wings wearing lingerie meant for the bride, was that Susanna Quinn had come prepared, not for revenge, but for clarity. What they didn't know was that her vision had slowly returned, weeks earlier. She hadn't told anyone, not because she was afraid, but because she was watching. Watching them lie, watching them manipulate, watching them scheme while still calling it love. And that morning, as she zipped the dress she was meant to be humiliated in, she made a decision. She would no longer be the broken girl. She would be the woman who walked away from the flames and into the light. The church bells rang, the cameras rolled, the world watched. And just when the groom smirked and whispered his final insult, she spoke. I know who I am. Do you? It wasn't a scream, it was a statement, measured, clear, unmistakable. Gasps filled the church as she removed the dark coat hiding the elegant white gown beneath. Then the doors opened behind her. And that's when he walked in. His name was Jackson Hale, a man they called the third son of steel, CEO of Hale Defense Tech, a man so rich he could buy an empire, and so reclusive, tabloids paid 6 figures just to capture his shadow. And that morning, he had watched the live broadcast. He had seen the moment her voice cracked. And for reasons yet understand, he had left his boardroom to find her. Jackson didn't know her story. He didn't need to. He only knew the look in her eyes, because he'd worn it once, too. Not everyone sees pain, but some people recognize it like a mirror. And when he stood before her at the altar, he didn't ask for an explanation. He offered something else. A choice. Leave with me, he said quietly, without grandeur. Not for a future you owe me, but for one you owe yourself. She didn't answer right away. Susanna wasn't a girl easily swept away. Not anymore. But somewhere between the laughter that turned to shock and the shame that turned to silence, she looked at this man who hadn't come to save her, only to stand beside her. And she whispered two words that felt like rain after a long, dry storm. I will. That was the beginning. Not of a love story written in flowers or rings or contracts, but of something slower, braver, real. A woman once discarded, a man who stopped running, and a world that finally had to admit the blind girl they'd tried to humiliate was the only one who had truly seen. Chapter 1. The bride who wasn't meant to stay. The veil they chose for her wasn't lace, it was mockery. Soft chiffon, but cut too long, meant to trip her. A train heavy with embellishments not to flatter, but to drag. Even the heels were half a size off, as if someone wanted her to stumble down the aisle, one uncertain step at a time. But Susanna Quinn didn't stumble. She had already learned how to walk in the dark. She sat still in the dressing room mirror, though she couldn't quite see herself anymore, not because of blindness, but because the girl she used to be had been buried under 3 years of silence, smoke, and shame. The bouquet on her lap was calla lilies, white, classic, and cold, much like the family she was marrying into. Her soon-to-be husband Derek Vaughn had once told her she looked like a dream. That was before the fire, before the surgeries, before he saw the scars. Now he couldn't even look her in the face without flinching. He had called it trauma. She called it truth. Outside the room, violins played a song she didn't choose. The aisle was filled with faces that weren't hers. Cameras flashed. Guests whispered. I'm still blind, right? I heard she's doing this for the money. Poor thing doesn't even know he's been cheating on her for months. Oh, but she knew. Susanna had known the moment he stopped touching her hand and started checking his reflection more than her pulse. She knew when he kissed her forehead instead of her lips. When her best friend Joanna suddenly had designer shoes and Derek's credit card on file at her favorite spa. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that Susanna could see. Not clearly, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to know they wanted her to fall apart, enough to stay quiet and watch, enough to learn exactly who had betrayed her, and when. Today wasn't a wedding. It was an execution. The makeup artist leaned in, oblivious. Almost done, sweetie, just a little more blush. Susanna nodded politely. Thank you. The girl smiled. You're being so brave. If it were me, I'd never have the courage to marry someone in front of that many people without even seeing him. The words tasted like poison, but Susanna swallowed them. She stood slowly, ignoring the sting in her knees, the weight in her chest. 3 years ago, she would have cried in a moment like this. Now, she simply adjusted her veil, tightened her grip on the bouquet, and walked to the door. The doors opened. And suddenly, every pair of eyes in that cathedral turned toward her. She walked slowly, measured, not fragile. Each step echoed. The marble beneath her heels sounded louder than usual, like the building itself was waiting to see if she'd survive this. Halfway down the aisle, she passed Derek. He was standing at the altar, smug, bored, his phone already vibrating in his pocket. She could see it in the tilt of his head. He wasn't thinking about vows. He was wondering what time Joanna would sneak upstairs. Their eyes met. He smiled, just slightly, the smile of a man who thought he had won. Susanna smiled back. Just slightly? She reached the altar. The priest began speaking. But the words blurred, time blurred. All she could hear was Derek whispering under his breath. This dress makes your hips look wide. Then came the moment. To vow. You, Susanna Quinn, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband. I don't, she said. Gasps. Camera clicks. A single rose petal drifted from the bouquet. The priest stammered, Pardon? I said I don't, she repeated, louder this time. Her voice did not shake. From the front row, Derek's mother froze. Joanna's lips parted. A murmur rippled through the pews. Derek laughed softly, stepping forward. You're making a scene. Sit down, Susanna. I've been sitting for 3 years, Derek. Her voice turned steel. I'm done pretending I can't see what's been right in front of me. And with that, she turned, slowly, carefully. She walked back down the aisle, past the shocked guests, past the fake friends, past the groom who had underestimated her. Then the cathedral doors flew open. And there, backlit by morning light, stood a man in a dark tailored suit. Not just any man. Jackson Hale. CEO, recluse, power defined in one presence. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He held out his hand. And the moment their fingers touched, Susanna knew. This was not her ending. It was her beginning. Chapter 2. The Woman Behind the Voice. They said the blind girl disappeared after the wedding. What they didn't say was that the woman who walked out wasn't blind anymore, or that she had spent the past 3 years training her voice to sound exactly like the girl people wanted her to be. Gentle, compliant, forgettable. But no one asked what her voice sounded like when she finally spoke for herself. Susanna Quinn stood in the hallway of the Manhattan Grand Hotel, holding a key card and a silence that pulsed like thunder beneath her skin. Suite 4803. House. Reserved under the name Jail. Not long ago, she had believed her voice was small, useless, something to be molded, measured, needed. A vessel for other people's comfort. Now, it was her weapon. The door opened before she knocked. Jackson Hale wasn't just powerful, he was precise. He didn't smile when he saw her, but something in his posture softened, an almost imperceptible tilt of the head, a lowering of his left shoulder, a silence that said, "You are safe here. Say whatever you need to say." Susanna stepped inside. The room was glass and granite, cold as power itself, but in the corner was a single couch, draped in wool and velvet. A fire burned low in a hearth no one had lit. Jazz played on vinyl, not a playlist. A record. Jackson Hale didn't believe in pretending. And that's what terrified her most. He would see her, not just her skin or voice, but the scar beneath it. The memory of being told she was lucky Derek didn't leave her after the accident. The hours she'd spent learning how to smile so it didn't look like she was in pain. Jackson turned away, walking to the bar. "Tea?" he asked. "Not wine, not whiskey, not champagne." "Ginger if you have it," she answered quietly. He nodded. "You sound different today." She flinched, just slightly. I took my voice back. He handed her the cup without speaking. The scent hit her first. Sharp, clean, familiar. She hadn't tasted real ginger tea since the hospital. Her mother used to brew it before the court dates. Before the settlements. Before the lies. For a long while, neither of them spoke. Only the fire cracked. Then he said, "Why him?" She looked up. "Derek Vaughn," Jackson clarified. "He's loud, obvious, vain, everything you're not." She hesitated. Then, because I was taught that people like him were the only kind who'd ever want someone like me. Jackson's jaw tightened. "People like you?" Damaged kind. A silence followed. Not awkward, just raw. Then softly, Jackson asked, "How long have you been able to see?" Susanna stared into her tea. "About 8 months. After the second surgery." "Why you didn't tell him?" "I wanted to. But then I heard him on the phone, with Joanna, talking about how he'd finally be free of the blind burden." Her voice didn't shake, it sliced. "I stayed quiet," she added, "because silence gives people just enough rope to hang themselves with." Jackson leaned against the mantel, arms folded. "You walked out of your own wedding today." Norman walked out of a lie. He studied her a moment longer. "So what happens next?" Susanna took a breath. She didn't know what she expected: tears, apology, a breakdown. But what came out was calm, a resolve shaped by years of being overlooked, underestimated, and pitied. "I want to be someone no one forgets again. I want my name to mean something outside of pity or scandal. I want to work, build something, speak without fear that someone will punish me for being heard." Jackson nodded slowly. "Good." She blinked. "Good? Because I was hoping you'd say that." He stepped away from the fire, walked toward a leather briefcase on the desk, and pulled out a manila folder. "Your medical file," he said. "A full timeline. The doctors, the surgeries. I had it verified before you walked down the aisle." Susanna's blood chilled. "You investigated me?" "I protected you," he said flatly. "Derek Vaughn filed a clause in your prenup. If you had gone through with the marriage, he would have had power of attorney over your residual insurance settlements. Almost $8 million. She sank into the velvet couch. Jackson sat across from her. "You didn't know?" "Oh, no." "No," she whispered. "But I'm not surprised." "I am," he replied. "You should have had someone in your corner, someone who saw you." Susanna raised her eyes. "Why do you care?" He answered without hesitation. "Because I once loved a woman who let herself be erased, and I swore I'd never watch it happen again." A beat passed. Then he added quietly, "And because I heard your voice before I ever saw your face." Her breath caught. "What?" He nodded toward the radio on the shelf. "You used to read poetry under the name C on the Midnight Memory Hour, didn't you?" Her hand went to her throat. "That was years ago." "I remembered it. The way you read Dickinson, the way your voice cracked halfway through the word remember. I've never forgotten it." Stormed out of him. All this time, she thought her voice had been lost in the dark. And yet, it had reached someone. Even when she couldn't see him, he'd heard her. Long before he'd ever met her. Jackson stood. "There's a position open at Hale Communications. Community Media Development. You'd be leading the Blind Literacy Initiative. Your voice, your name, your rules." Her throat tightened. "Is this pity?" His eyes sharpened. "No, this is recognition." He walked to the door, hand on the knob. "When you're ready," he said, "walk through a door that leads to something real." And then he left. Alone again, Susanna stared at the folder, the untouched tea, the room still echoing with a truth she hadn't expected. And she thought her story ended the day Derek turned away. She was wrong. Her story was just beginning. Chapter 3. When the past comes back wearing his smile. It was raining the day she saw him again. Not a violent rain, just the quiet kind, the kind that dripped from the eaves and softened the sound of everything else. As if the world had dimmed its lights, unsure how to greet the moment that was about to arrive. Susanna stood beneath the overhang of a small cafe downtown, hands tucked into her coat sleeves, eyes tracing the sidewalk. She hadn't planned to be there, not at that hour, not on that block. But something in her needed a minute of stillness, a moment to remind herself that the world still spun, even if her own life had changed on its axis. She had left behind the house she shared with Derek, had moved into a one-bedroom walk-up with no furniture but a record player and a mattress on the floor. She'd taken the position Jackson offered, not because she trusted him yet, but because it felt like the first decision she'd made for herself in a very long time. And then he appeared, smiling, laughing, Embra crooked over his shoulder as he leaned in to shield the woman beside him from the drizzle. Derek Vaughn. Still perfectly tailored, still effortlessly charming, and utterly unchanged. Except for the woman. She was tall, brunette, the kind of beauty that required no introduction. Her laugh was loud, careless. Her eyes glittered with a look Susanna recognized too well. The look of someone who thought she was the first woman to ever be called special by that mouth. Susanna's heart didn't pound. It ate, quietly. Because in that moment she realized something strange. It didn't hurt because he had replaced her. It hurt because he hadn't changed a single thing. To him, she was just... And to this new woman, he was still the sun. The pair passed without noticing her. And Susanna might have let them go, might have turned away and walked into the mist like a ghost vanishing into her new life, if not for the voice that came next. "Miss Quinn?" She turned, and everything in her froze. Because the man standing there, in a navy coat, umbrella in hand, was not Derek. But he had his smile. Only older, softer, smarter. "Caleb," she breathed. He nodded, his grin uncertain. "I wasn't sure it was you." Susanna stared. She hadn't seen him in 11 years, not since the spring after her father's funeral, not since the day he moved away, leaving behind a half-written song on her guitar and a letter she never opened. "God," she whispered, "you look like someone who found a time machine and took a wrong turn?" "No," she said softly, "like someone I forgot I missed." They stood there, the rain falling between them like a curtain waiting to be drawn back. He gestured toward the cafe behind her. "May I?" She nodded. Inside, the scent of coffee and old wood wrapped around them like a memory. They sat near the window, their reflections barely visible against the gray outside. "I didn't think you'd remember me," he said after. "I never forgot you," she replied. He looked down at his hands, large, calloused, still bearing the shadow of someone who played piano late into the night. "I heard what happened," he said gently. "The wedding, the accident, the way he treated you." Susanna's stomach tightened. "You don't have to talk about it." "I know, but I want you to know, I never believed a word of what they said, and I wish I'd stayed in touch." She nodded slowly. "You left without saying goodbye." He winced. "My father got sick. We had to move overnight. I wrote you a letter, but I never sent it, and by the time I came back to visit, you were already with him." Him. She hated how the words still twisted her gut. "I thought you forgot me," she said. "I thought I wasn't good enough?" Susanna's eyes softened. That was the thing about Caleb. He never pretended to be someone he wasn't. He didn't throw grand parties or chase headlines. He listened, he saw people. And somehow, even now, even after everything, he saw her. The real her. The girl who once wrote love songs in secret notebooks. The woman who now led literacy programs for the blind and never forgot what it felt like to read in the dark. "I saw your name in a press release," he said. "Hale Communications. I knew it had to be you." She smiled faintly. "Jackson Hale has a way of offering you a future without asking if you're ready for one." Ablin chuckled. "He always was one step ahead." "You know him?" "We went to NYU together. He played chess, I played cello. He said I was too idealistic for business school. Maybe he was right." "You still play?" she asked. "Every day," he said, then paused. "But only for people who mean something." She blinked. "That used to be me." "He still is." Their eyes met, and something old and broken in her exhaled. Maybe it wasn't the rain, maybe it was her heart, finally letting go of the ache it had been carrying. Then her phone buzzed. It was a message from Jackson. "Tomorrow. Press conference, 11 a.m. Don't hide anymore." She stared at the words. Caleb glanced at her. "Everything okay?" She nodded. But inside, her world tilted again. Because tomorrow, the world would meet her. Not the blind girl, not the discarded bride, not the scandal. Tomorrow they would hear her voice. And in that moment, she knew something deeper than certainty. She wasn't afraid of being seen anymore. Not by Jackson, not by Derek, not even by the entire world. Because someone from her past had just looked her in the eye and seen someone he still believed in. Someone worth showing up for. Someone who had never stopped shining, even when the lights went out. Chifo, the woman who refused to disappear. The first thing Susanna noticed when she walked into the press room was the silence. Not the kind that welcomes. The kind that waits. Rows of suited journalists and photographers shifted in their seats, like birds sensing a storm. Their lenses were clean, their notepads open, ready to scribble a headline sharp enough to cut skin. The Hale Communications logo glowed behind the podium. And she, Susanna Quinn, the discarded wife, the blind girl turned scandal, the woman whispered about on elevators and dinner tables, stood just behind the curtain, trembling. "I don't think I can do this," she whispered. "You don't have to," Jackson said softly from beside her. "But if you do, they'll stop defining you by the man who left and start listening to the woman who stayed." She looked up at him. The man who had, without fanfare or demand, given her space to find her voice again. Then she took a breath and walked out. The cameras flashed the moment her heels hit the hardwood floor. Susanna blinked once, twice, steadying herself under the blaze of artificial light. The podium felt taller than she remembered. The microphone, closer. The whispers, louder. But when she looked up, she didn't see vultures. She saw a mirror, 100 faces, watching to see who she would be. And she didn't flinch. "Good morning," she said clearly, her voice low but firm. "My name is Susanna Quinn, and until recently, I was someone you probably only knew as the woman who was left at the altar." There was a collective shift in the room. She smiled softly. "I was also known as the blind bride, the abandoned fiancé, the unfortunate headline." She paused, eyes sweeping the crowd. "None of those are who I am." The room fell silent again, this time not with expectation, but with attention. "I came here today not to clear my name or to drag someone else's through the dirt. I came because I refuse to disappear." Her words rang like a bell in a cathedral. "I was born with full sight. I lost it during a fire at 17, trying to save a girl I barely knew. I spent 4 years in darkness, learning how to live without light, without pity, and without apology. I met Derek Vaughn 2 years into that journey." The murmurs. "Back then, I thought love meant someone choosing to walk beside you in the dark. What I've learned is, real love never needs you to shrink." A journalist raised a hand, hesitant. "Miss Quinn, there were rumors that your condition was exaggerated for sympathy. Do you want to respond to that?" Susanna didn't blink. "I don't need sympathy," she said calmly. "I need dignity. I don't need anyone to believe my story. I just need the strength to live it." Another voice, this time sharper. "Are you saying Derek Vaughn used you for press? For leverage?" Jackson rose from his seat, but Susanna gently touched his arm. "I'm not here to say what Derek did," she said softly. "I'm here to say what I won't allow anymore." A hush followed. "I won't let silence define me. I won't let wealth protect cruelty. And I won't pretend I was ever ashamed to be me." There was stillness, then a surprising sound. Applause. Not polite, not orchestrated, but real. It spread like a ripple. Hands clapping from the back row forward, then standing, then erupting. Susanna stood there, breathing hard, tears pricking behind her eyes. Not because she was overwhelmed, but because, for the first time, she felt seen. Later that night, she stood on the rooftop of Hale Communications, arms wrapped around herself, the wind tugging gently at her coat. The city glittered below. "You shook the world today," Jackson's voice said behind her. Susanna smiled faintly. "No, I just whispered a truth loud enough for people to hear." He stepped beside her. "You know," he said, "there was a moment, when I first read about you, I thought, this woman is going to disappear. She's going to vanish like so many do, humiliated and hurt." She glanced at him. "And?" He looked her dead in the eye. "And then you walked into my building with nothing but your story and a steel spine. And I realized some women were never meant to disappear. They were meant to remind the rest of us what resilience looks like." Her breath caught. He stepped a little closer. "I don't know what you need next, Susanna, but I know whatever it is, you deserve it." She didn't speak. She just turned, her eyes reflecting the city lights, and said quietly, "I'm not going back. Not to the woman I was, not to the life they picked for me. Jackson nodded slowly. Then let's start building the one you choose. That night, as Susanna walked home through the quiet streets of Manhattan, she passed a boutique window. In the reflection, she saw her own silhouette. And for once, she didn't look away. Because she finally recognized the woman staring back. Not broken. Not abandoned. Not small. But whole. Because she was no longer the woman who needed permission to exist. She was the woman who refused to disappear. Chapter 5. The Man Who Saw Her Through the Smoke. The night air in Manhattan had a way of wrapping around you, cold, alive, whispering the things you didn't dare say aloud. Susanna sat alone in the corner of a jazz bar, tucked beneath West 73rd. No press, no headlines, just shadows and saxophone. Her fingers ran along the rim of a warm teacup. She hadn't ordered whiskey. Not tonight. The old her would have tried to forget the silence. The new her was learning to hold it. Across the room, Jackson Hale leaned against the bar. His tie was gone, his shirt rolled at the cuffs, and there was something in the way he studied her. Not with desire, not with pity, but recognition. Like a man who had once stood in a burning house and remembered exactly which window he'd stared out of to survive. He didn't come to her immediately. He waited. Like he always did. When he finally sat beside her, he didn't speak at first, just poured her another cup from the pot the waiter had forgotten to clear. "I used to come here when I needed to disappear," he said. Susanna looked at him, her voice soft. "You don't strike me as the disappearing type." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Everyone disappears. The powerful ones just learn how to do it with style. There was a weight to his words, one she hadn't noticed before. "Tell me something," she said quietly. "Why me?" He didn't pretend not to understand. Instead, he answered with the kind of truth that leaves scars in its wake. "Because 3 years ago, I watched the woman I loved burn in front of me. Not literally, but slowly, painfully, until she was nothing but ash in the shape of a name on a foundation plaque." Susanna turned toward him, eyes wide. "My fiancée," he explained. "She was in the tower during the explosion in Dubai. She didn't die that day. She survived the blast, the collapse, but not the aftermath. The press tore her apart, said she was responsible, that she was the reason my company pulled funding. It wasn't true, but it didn't matter." Pause. "She begged me not to speak up, said the silence would protect me. My empire, our legacy." "I did it," Susanna whispered. His voice was a razor wrapped in velvet. "It did, and I lost her anyway." He stared down at his hands like they weren't part of him anymore. "She was smoke long before she was gone. I just didn't know how to breathe without choking on her memory." The music played on, slow, aching, like it knew the words they couldn't say. Susanna reached out, touched his hand. "Then why help me?" He finally looked up, eyes meeting hers. "Because when you walked into my boardroom in that cheap coat, holding your chin like a sword, I saw her. Not the woman I lost, the woman I should have been brave enough to stand beside." A silence settled between them, the kind that wasn't empty but full. Of understanding, of echoes, of everything they'd carried into that bar. "I'm not her," Susanna said. "I know," he replied. "You're the woman who walked through fire and just like that, something shifted. Not loudly, not suddenly, but the way a heart cracks open when it's finally safe to beat again." Later that week. The boardroom was flooded with morning light. Hale Communications' annual strategy session was underway. Suit jackets, executive folders, polished shoes. But all eyes were on her. Susanna Quinn, no longer just a name whispered in corridors, stood at the head of the table. Not because someone gave her permission, but because she earned the space. Jackson entered late. Deliberately. Let them see who he stood behind. Let them see who he'd chosen to back, not because she made him look good, but because she made the truth look worth fighting for. She wore navy today. Simple, strong, a subtle nod to who she used to be and who she refused to remain. Transparency is no longer optional, she said, and dignity is no longer negotiable. Someone murmured about cost, another about scandal fatigue. Andre raised a brow. Do you want to sell integrity? He asked coolly. Or do you want to sell apology letters every 6 months? Silent. And slow nods. Because they weren't afraid of her anymore. They were listening. That night, Susanna stood on the balcony of Jackson's penthouse, a glass of red wine untouched in her hand. Below, the city sparkled like broken glass. He joined her without a word. The skyline stretched out before them, eternal and restless. Do you ever wonder, she said softly, if the version of you they write about in articles, in meetings, in award speeches, is a stranger? He exhaled. Every damn day. Do you still want to be him? He looked at her. He said, I want to be the man who stayed when the smoke cleared. She turned to him, and for the first time, she didn't see power or pride or perfection. She saw grief, growth. She saw a man who had once watched the world burn and now knew how to hold the hand of a woman who had been through the same. I think, she said gently, you already are. In that stillness, where no headlines lived and no cameras chased, Jackson leaned forward, but not to kiss her, to press his forehead to hers. Quiet, close, and moving. And in that breath, in that silent vow without rings or witness, two people who had survived fire finally found something more powerful than survival. Beast. Chapter 6. The Man Who Bought Her Silence. It was raining the night the envelope arrived. Not the soft kind of rain that smells like renewal, but the sharp, punishing kind that slashes through glass and makes even the strongest doubt the road ahead. Susanna stared at the heavy cream paper, her name printed in calligraphy. No return address, no note. Just a gold foil seal and her initials, S, engraved in cold precision. Inside, a check. $10 million. No memo, no explanation. Just a number. And beneath it, a second envelope, this one smaller, handwritten. She unfolded the card with shaking hands. Courts preserve the peace. To protect what matters most, sometimes we must choose silence over justice. This isn't a bribe, it's a bridge. Burn it or cross it. Jay hugged. She didn't cry, but she didn't scream. She just stood still in her apartment, the rain hammering against the windows, wondering how a man could look at her like she was a miracle one night and try to buy her silence the next. 2 days earlier, the rumors had reached the press. Not about her, but about her father. An old bankruptcy settlement, a lost pension lawsuit, something he had quietly buried to keep her out of the spotlight. But now it was resurfacing. And somehow, Jackson had known before she did. I did it to protect you, he said, voice low, eyes unreadable. They were on the rooftop again, overlooking a city that didn't know how to mind its own business. Then why didn't you tell me? She asked, her voice trembling. Why a check? Why a message in an envelope like I'm some liability you're trying to settle? He looked at her like he didn't know how to answer, because maybe he didn't. You think I want to bury you, he said, stepping closer. I'm trying to save what we have before the vultures tear it apart. It's not about them, Jackson, she whispered. It's about you. About me. About whether you see me as your equal or just another name to protect. Her words cut like glass. Not loud, but sharp. You can't love someone, she added, and then pay them not to speak. He reached for her hand. She pulled back. And for the first time since they met, silence didn't feel sacred. It felt suffocating. That weekend, she didn't answer his texts, didn't return his call. Instead, Susanna went home, not to Manhattan, but to the edge of Rhode Island, where the shoreline whispered secrets older than money and ambition. Her father was there, thinner than she remembered, still wore the same flannel jacket he'd had since she was 12. "I know what they're saying," he told her, pouring her coffee the way he used to when she studied for finals. "And I know what he did." "You don't think he meant to hurt me?" "I think," her father said quietly, "he's a man who's never had to ask permission to protect someone before." She looked at him, tears threatening. "I'm tired of being protected," she whispered. Her father smiled, the kind that broke and healed all at once. "Then show him you're not something to shield," he said. "Show him you're someone who chooses to stay." Monday morning. Susanna returned to Manhattan with wind in her bones and a storm behind her eyes. She didn't wait for an invitation. She walked straight into Jackson Hale's office, past the stunned assistants, past the boardroom whispers, and placed the uncashed check on his desk. Then, quietly, she pulled something from her bag. A photograph of a fire-damaged girl in a hospital bed. It was her, the version of herself no one had ever seen. Not broken, just rebuilding. "Beth," she said, placing the photo beside the check, "is who you tried to buy silence from." Jackson stood, slowly. "I didn't know how else to keep you from being hurt," he said. "Then you don't know me at all." She turned, ready to leave. But his voice stopped her. "You think I don't regret it?" he said. "Every minute since that envelope left my hands, I've wanted to rip it back. Not because you didn't need the money, but because I didn't deserve your silence. I wanted your voice. I wanted your fight. I wanted all of it." And she didn't move. Just listened. "I bought silence," he said. "But what I needed was your truth." Susanna turned, eyes wet, breath shallow. "Then take it," she said. And she stepped forward. Not toward safety, not toward forgiveness, but toward honesty. Toward the man who saw her through the smoke and finally wanted to be seen in return. Later that night, they stood at the window of his penthouse. No cameras, no contracts, no sealed envelopes. Just him, just her, just truth. "I don't need you to protect me from the world, Jackson," she whispered. "I just need you to stand beside me in it." He nodded, placing her hand over his heart. "I will," he promised, "and I won't pay you to stay silent ever again, but I'll spend the rest of my life earning the right to hear your voice." And this time, the silence wasn't empty. It was sacred again. Not because it hid the truth, but because it held it. Together. Chapter 7. The Woman the World Finally Saw. It began with a whisper. Not a press release, not a headline, but the gentle whisper of one intern to another. "That's her. That's the woman who turned down his check." By midweek, it had become a rumor. By Friday, it was a reckoning. Susanna Quinn, the invisible wife, the blind bride, the woman the tabloids once labeled a sympathy story, was finally seen. And not because of what she wore. Not because of the man beside her. But because of what she stood for. 6 months earlier. She was the ghost in her own wedding photos. Smiling but not lit. Present but not visible. Her dress had shimmered. The cathedral had gleamed. But her name had been quietly replaced by his title, Mrs. Hale. That was all anyone cared to know. "You'll get used to it," Jackson had told her once, mistaking her silence for shyness. "The spotlight always burns at first." But it wasn't the spotlight that burned. It was the erasure. And Susanna had grown tired of being invisible, of being the girl behind the lens, the story behind the story. So she stopped hiding. I got all at once. But, piece by piece. The first step. She said yes to the interview. Not the network one, not the glossy profile. Just a podcast, run by a former nurse who had followed her recovery story. The episode wasn't polished, her voice shook. There was a long silence when she spoke about the fire, the blindness, the way the world treats women it thinks are broken. And yet, it was the silence that moved people most. Because in that silence, she didn't cry. She didn't flinch. she breathed. And suddenly millions of women from small towns in Montana to high-rises in Manhattan recognized her. Not as a billionaire's wife, but as themselves. A ripple. The mailroom filled with letters. The email inbox crashed twice, and women wrote from shelters, from hospital beds, from corporate boardrooms and corner cafes. They didn't ask for advice. They said, "Thank you. Thank you for not being perfect, for showing your scars. Thank you for standing up to the man who thought he was doing the right thing." The world didn't see her as weak anymore. They saw her as real. And in a culture that prized polish, that kind of authenticity was revolutionary. The return to the ballroom. Jackson Hale was being honored at a gala. 1 year since his company had launched its philanthropic arm. 1 year since she had married him and faded quietly into the footnotes. Only this time, Susanna didn't arrive on his arm. And she entered alone. Hair loose, dressed simple, eyes steady. When the MC paused to welcome Mr. and Mrs. Hale, all heads turned. And for the first time, they didn't look at him. They looked at her. Jackson noticed, of course. She walked across the room like she belonged there, like she wasn't borrowing the space or the spotlight, but was finally choosing it. And in his chest, something shifted. He wasn't afraid of losing her to the world anymore. He was proud the world finally got to meet her. A firelight speech. They gave her a microphone that night. Not out of obligation, not because she asked, but because the keynote speaker had canceled and the committee, in a moment of unexpected faith, turned to her. She didn't prepare remarks. She didn't need to. She spoke like the wind does, soft at first, then full of movement. "I used to think healing looked like silence," she said, eyes scanning the room, like being small and grateful and staying out of the way. Like healing, real healing, looks like voice, like walking into the same room where you were once erased and saying, "I'm still here. And I remember everything." The room held its breath. When someone ever tells you that you're too broken, too late, too loud, too much, just remember. And she paused. Let the silence settle. Even a shattered mirror still reflects light. They didn't clap right away. They just stood. Backstage. Afterwards, Jackson found her leaning against the marble wall, hands shaking slightly. He didn't say anything. I slid a water bottle into her hand and leaned beside her. He whispered, "Was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." She smiled softly, eyes glimmering with tears not yet shed. "I didn't do it for them," she said. "Not really." "I know," he replied. Then he turned toward her fully, voice low and reverent. "You changed tonight. You didn't become someone new. You just stopped hiding the woman you've always been." And in that quiet moment, between old wounds and new truths, they both understood something vital. She didn't belong to his world anymore. He would have to step into hers. And she let him. Not because she needed to be saved, but because she had already saved herself. And when you've walked through fire, you don't wait for the world to give you permission to rise. You just do. Chapter 8. The divorce heard round the world. The papers were signed at 6:42 a.m. No media, no attorneys, no boardroom drama. Two people in silence, seated across an oak table worn by time and choices neither of them could undo. Outside, the sky was still half asleep, smeared with the blush of early light. In the distance, church bells rang once and then stopped, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Jackson Hale didn't move. He sat still, pen in hand, the divorce decree before him. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his tie discarded, his eyes fixed on the woman across from him, the woman he had married, forgotten, remembered, and finally seen. She signed first. Not out of anger, not with tears, but with the kind of grace that can only be born from heartbreak lived all the way through. Of Susanna Quinn Hale. Or, now, simply Susanna Quinn. 2 weeks earlier. The whispers began at the Winter Arts Gala. It wasn't the dress she wore, though she looked like moonlight had draped itself across her shoulders. It was her posture, the way she stood beside Jackson, not beneath him. The way she laughed with the violinist, smiled at the barista from their building, whispered something kind to the janitor before stepping onto the stage. She didn't look like a wife anymore. She looked like a woman who remembered her own name. And when the photographers caught a shot of her hand gently pulling away from Jackson's, it went viral. The Quinn effect trended for 3 days. The moment it all broke. They sat on the terrace of his penthouse the night before the announcement. Rain lashed the glass. The skyline of Manhattan flickered in electric bruises of blue and gold. Jackson poured her tea. He still remembered how she liked it. 1 sugar, no milk. He always remembered the details, just not the meaning behind them. "You haven't worn the ring in weeks," he said softly. She looked down at her hand, naked, honest. "I wore it when I was invisible," He winced, not at her cruelty, but her clarity. "You think I didn't love you?" he asked, finally looking at her. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she touched the railing, traced the raindrops. "I think you loved the idea of me, the quiet girl, the girl who didn't ask for anything, who didn't interrupt, who made you feel safe without ever needing safety herself." Then she turned to him, voice gentle, eyes unflinching. "I grew up, and you stayed comfortable." The public announcement. They released a joint statement. "After deep reflection and with mutual respect, we have chosen to part ways. We remain grateful for the journey we shared." Jackson Hale and Susanna Quinn. But the media didn't believe it. They called it a scandal, a betrayal, a power move. They speculated she was pregnant, that he was secretly in love with a new protégé, that she had fallen for a novelist in France. But the truth was simple. They had outgrown the shape they once fit together. And it wasn't hatred that undid them. It was her becoming whole. The day of the divorce. No one came to the courthouse, as no one needed to. Because Susanna walked in alone, with her head high and her heart steady. She wore flats, not heels, carried no bag, no entourage. Jackson was already there. He stood when she entered. "I ordered your favorite pastries," he said awkwardly, gesturing to a paper bag. She smiled, not with affection, but with a bittersweet kindness. "Still remembering things too late, Jax." He nodded, accepting it. They signed in silence. The pen glided across the parchment like a soft farewell. Not a death, not a betrayal. Just the final page in a book they both had outgrown. Outside the courthouse. A reporter caught her at the crosswalk. "Susanna, any comment about the divorce?" She turned, not annoyed, not ashamed, just tired of being asked about men instead of meaning. "We should go," she said. "Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. Not because you stopped loving them, but because you finally started loving yourself." Click. Laugh. Hissed. That moment was on the front page of the New York Times the next day. Divorce heard round the world. Later that night, Jackson watched the news alone. The penthouse echoed with the sound of a piano that hadn't been touched in months. He had never realized how quiet the place felt without her humming under her breath, lighting a candle at dusk, or laughing softly when she found a typo in a novel's spine. And when he saw her face on the screen, radiant, not bitter, he whispered the words, "Too late." "I see you now." But the wind outside didn't answer. Only the silence did. And this time, it was hers. Chapter 9. The question he never asked until it was too late. It was always the small questions that mattered most. Not, "Do you love me?" or "Will you stay?" But the quiet ones. "Did you sleep okay? Did you feel seen today? Are you happy with me?" Jackson Hale had asked Susanna 1,000 questions in the years they were married. About stocks, about wine pairings, about logistics for charity galas. He knew how she liked her tea. He memorized the way she filed her keys on the entryway hook. He could recite her mother's favorite flower and the exact date her father died. But he had never asked, "Why would make you stay?" And now, she was already gone. 3 days after the divorce. The sun hadn't fully risen when he found her again. She was sitting alone at the far end of the botanical conservatory, her frame bathed in the honey glow of morning light filtering through glass. Her journal rested on her lap, pages open, ink smudged where her fingers had lingered too long. He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. She turned, already knowing he was there. "Most people wait at the front entrance," she said quietly. Jackson stepped closer, his suit crisp, his tie slightly undone, like something inside him had forgotten how to present itself properly. "I'm not most people anymore," he murmured. She didn't correct him. They sat on opposite ends of the bench, a respectful distance, like two passengers waiting for different trains. "I didn't expect to see you," she said. "I didn't expect to need to," he replied. There was a pause, and then, "You looked beautiful in that photograph," he added. "The one they used for the interview. You looked like yourself again." She nodded once. No smile. No thank you. Only a truth neither of them could ignore. At the moment he almost asked. He reached for something in his coat pocket. Not a ring, not a letter. A photograph. It was taken 5 years earlier, in Maine. She'd fallen asleep on a plaid blanket by the lake, the book she was reading still open on her chest. Her hair was wild, her face at peace. "I kept this," he said, "not because I was afraid of forgetting you, but because I was afraid I never really saw you." She looked down at the photo, then back at him. "It's funny," she said. "You always remembered things, but you never noticed them." He swallowed hard. "What would you have needed from me?" he asked finally. She blinked, the question catching her off guard, not because it was cruel, but because it was years too late. "We ask," she said simply. "That." The night before their wedding, Susanna stood barefoot in his kitchen, her dress rehearsal bouquet resting on the counter beside 2 untouched glasses of champagne. Jackson had been on the phone with a board member. A merger was falling through. The numbers didn't align. The market was shifting. She waited. 10 minutes, then 20. And finally she asked, "What do you want to do this?" He'd smiled without turning around. "Of course I do." She had nodded, even though he never asked her back. Present day. That story belonged to Nika. He stood to leave. "I should go," she said. "I have an early interview." Jackson rose with her. "There's one more thing," he said. "Before you go." She turned, steady, strong, a woman who had already closed the door. But he stepped closer anyway. "What did I miss, Susanna?" he asked, voice low, breaking. "What moment was it that I could have changed this, saved us?" She looked at him, and for the first time there was no anger in her gaze, only deep, quiet sorrow. "The moment you didn't run after me the night I cried in the guest room," she said. "The moment I said I was tired and you said me too instead of why. The moment you looked at your phone when I finally wore the dress I thought you love. The moment you said I was fine when I needed to feel extraordinary." She inhaled, steeled herself. "At the moment you said nothing, when I said goodbye." Outside the conservatory. Rain had started to fall, soft, scattered, as if the sky was remembering something it had tried to forget. Susanna walked toward the car, waiting at the curb. Jackson stayed behind, the photograph still in his hand, his heart heavier than it had ever been at any business loss, any family betrayal, any public scandal. He had lost the only thing that ever truly mattered. Not because of a mistake, but because of everything he never asked. The question. 3 weeks passed. She didn't hear from him. Not through calls, not through lawyers, not through flowers or press statements. Then one day, a letter arrived. An unmarked, handwritten, just 1 page. "Susanna, If I could go back, I'd still build the company, still chase the numbers, still fall, still climb. But I would ask you one thing. Every morning, every night. What do you need to stay? And I'd do it. Not because I owed you, but because I finally understood that love is not something we promise once at an altar. It's something we prove in the quiet, everyday questions. And I never asked. I'm sorry. If someday you need anything, not a mansion, not a promise, just a place to fall without judgment. The door will never close again. Jay. She folded the letter, pressed it to her chest, and cried for the first time in months. Not because she wanted to return, but because the man she once loved had finally found the right words in the silence she left behind. Chapter 10. What Love Looks Like When It's Free. It didn't begin with fireworks. It didn't begin with a kiss. It began with a cup of coffee, left quietly outside her door, just the way she liked it. One sugar, no cream, lid slightly off because he remembered she hated the sound of plastic squeaking when opened. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was the first one that expected nothing in return. 1 year later, Lake Lucille, Maine. The house was small. Nothing like the penthouse. No glass walls, no imported marble. But the floors creaked with warmth, and the wind carried the scent of pine and lake water through the open window. Jackson Hale sat on the porch, barefoot, jeans rolled at the ankle, a book resting in his lap. No tie, no headlines, just the sound of a woman laughing inside the house. Not loudly, but freely, like the kind of laugh that had forgotten how to protect itself. Susanna stepped out, barefoot too. Her hair was damp from the lake. Her shoulders wrapped in the blanket he once wore on the worst night of their marriage, the night she left and he let her go. But then she had come back on her own. And this time, he hadn't asked her to. 6 months ago. She showed up on his doorstep, cheeks wind-chapped, eyes wary. "I'm not here to stay," she said. He nodded. "I know. Why I didn't want to wonder for the rest of my life," she added, "what it would be like to speak and be heard." He'd opened the door wider, stepped aside. That's all this place is for. No apologies, no conditions, no confessions. It's time. And a promise that the door would stay open until she decided otherwise. Present day. They sat beside one another on the porch, silence comfortable, unforced. Jackson didn't reach for her hand. Susanna reached for his. She threaded her fingers between his, slowly, deliberately. "I used to think love had to be earned," she said, voice low. "That if I wasn't useful, charming, irreplaceable, I wouldn't be wanted." Jackson turned toward her. It's a nodded. He asked. "Now I know the kind of love I want," she said. "The kind that lets me leave and still makes space for me when I find my way back." His throat tightened, but he smiled. "You always had a place here." Later that evening, they danced in the kitchen. No music, just the soft rhythm of rain against tin and the hum of something unspoken between them. His hand rested lightly at her waist. Her head fell against his shoulder, the way it used to when things were simpler, before fortune complicated everything, before the media turned her into a name and him into a brand. But here, in this small cabin by the lake, they were just two people who had loved, failed, and dared to believe again. Not in perfection, but in presence, a quiet proposal. He never got on one knee, never pulled out a diamond ring. They were watching the sunset, the lake catching fire in gold and rose. She leaned against him. He whispered, "Would you stay if there were no contracts, no headlines, no vows to keep you here?" She nodded into his chest. "I'd stay because you'd let me leave if I needed to." He kissed her forehead, but then said nothing more. Because that's what love looks like when it's free. Their wedding. No cathedral. Just pine trees. Bodak. and a few people who never stopped rooting for them, quietly, lovingly, from a distance. Her dress was simple linen, no veil, just wind through her hair. She wore no tie, just a smile that looked like peace. She didn't promise to obey or stay forever. She promised to speak. He promised to listen. They promised to keep the door open, all not to trap, but to trust. And later, in her own words, from her memoir, we think love is about ownership, about having someone so tightly they'll never leave. But real love doesn't ask, "Where are you going?" It asks, "Do you have what you need to be whole?" I walked away from the man who built empires. And when I returned, he offered me a home, not made of steel and glass, of forgiveness and freedom. And in that freedom, I chose him. Not once, not forever, but every day. And I still do. The last light of the ceremony had dimmed, and yet, for the first time in her life, Jang Soo-ki stood beneath it unafraid. Not of blindness, not of betrayal, not of losing the man she once believed would save her. Because this time, she had saved herself. She didn't need a perfect past to deserve a beautiful future. All she needed was truth and the courage to let it rise. And when Xu Jinggu took her hand, no longer as a woman to protect, but as an equal to stand beside, something quiet and powerful filled the room. A kind of love that didn't demand masks, didn't barter with shame. It simply said, "I see you, all of you, and that is enough." They left behind a wedding soaked in scandal, but walked toward a marriage steeped in choice. Not legacy, not pity, just love. The very people who had once labeled her as trash now watched her rise, not because she had power, but because she had the heart to walk away from everything that tried to break her, and the grace to forgive herself for once believing she had to stay small to be loved. Love built on conditions is a transaction. But love that sees you, chooses you, and stays, not because it must, but because it wants to, that's the kind that heals. Jang Soo-ki's story reminds us, you don't have to be perfect to be worthy. You don't have to see clearly to be seen. You don't have to fight the world to win. You just need to refuse to disappear in it. Sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is to stop waiting for someone to rescue her and become the one who chooses herself first. If this story brought tears to your eyes, share it with someone who once believed they were too broken to be chosen. Because sometimes, the world doesn't need another perfect bride. It needs a woman who walks away from a false crown and finds the truth she already carries in her heart. And maybe, just maybe, someone out there is waiting to hear. You are not too much. You are not too late. You are exactly what love looks like when it's finally free. If you believe that too, leave a comment in the comments. Let's help someone feel seen today just by hitting share.